probably watching this video because you'd like to know a little something about math, specifically algebra or arithmetic, right? That's why you clicked on this. Well, let's talk about what those things actually are, right? When you say math, what does that word mean? Mathematics, maths, if you're coming from the British realm, what is math? For that matter, what is algebra? What is arithmetic? Right? We talk about these words. It's going to be really helpful if we know what it is we're talking about. Right? So I'm going to give you my definitions for what we mean by each of these terms, starting with the most fundamental, mathematics. Right? Math is a logical system of symbolic and theoretical constructs created to accurately represent reality. And unlike some videos that are very polished, I'm intentionally typing things out as we go, trying to replicate kind of writing on the board in a more legible manner, because I think that encourages note-taking and facilitates note-taking. So please have your notebook out with you and be writing this down along with me so that you can look back to these definitions, look back to these examples, and we'll go through this together. All right, so math is a logical system of symbolic and theoretical constructs created to accurately represent reality. Now, there's a long-standing debate about whether math was invented or discovered, and I come down very firmly, math was invented. Math is a system, whether we use symbols or words to describe what's going on, that system was created over hundreds of years, thousands of years, with lots of people participating, and it was created to accurately represent reality, right? There is a sense that it's representing things that really happen. And some of the things we learn from studying the system itself don't seem to have anything to do with physical reality. And then dozens of years or hundreds of years later, all of a sudden some insight comes out that uses that theory, right? But at its most fundamental, whether that's counting or the operations of arithmetic, those things represent what's actually happening in real life, right? So that's what we mean by math, a logical system of symbolic and theoretical constructs created to accurately represent reality. Right. Now, before we can get into defining algebra or arithmetic, there's a quote I need to give you that I think helps us frame what it is we're going to be doing in these videos, in your math classes. And that is a quote describing what it is that mathematicians generally do. Now, this doesn't apply to everyone whose job title is mathematician, but it's pretty good. So mathematicians, hopefully you can write at least as fast as I can type. Mathematicians create models of unfamiliar real-world situations. Right? That's what mathematicians are doing. They're creating models of unfamiliar real-world situations. They then use these models to do three things: to uncover truth, make predictions, and make decisions that optimize the use of scarce resources. Finding X in and of itself is just kind of a game, right? The steps that you'll learn or have already learned for solving equations when you just see the numbers and variables and operations, that in itself is not particularly useful outside of a math classroom, right? Those techniques that we're going to learn are useful for the sake of uncovering truth, right? Finding out some uh, fact about our real world. Um, that's used to make predictions, right? Based on this information, what do we think is going to happen next? Not just for weather forecasting, but in all kinds of situations. We want to be able to predict what's going to happen, quantitative actual data, using math to analyze that data. That's going to help us make predictions. And then making decisions that optimize the use of scarce resources, right? So often we can just kind of flip a coin, think, well, maybe it's this, maybe it's that. But if we actually use mathematics to understand the situation, we can make better decisions about how to allocate our resources, how to allocate our time, our money, our attention, um, all of that. So that's what mathematicians are doing, right? Now, these models, the classic model, the ones you're most familiar with and the ones that are most commonly used out there, are all algebraic models, right? So now we can talk about what algebra is. And algebra is actually several things. So algebra is most classically the study of the structure of mathematics. If you go to an actual mathematician who's got their PhD and they say, oh, I specialized in algebra, this is what they mean, right? It goes much deeper than what you're used to from grade school math. It's all about the structure of things. Right now, it's related to our grade school algebra, because another way to describe algebra is the study of relations and operations. So we're going to have to define operations, but operations can apply to things much broader than just 3 plus 5 equals 8. But it could also apply to just 3 plus 5 equals 8. There's a lot of studying of what's going on within those operations in various contexts, right? And how different quantities relate to each other, different sets of numbers relate to each other. All of that is algebra. Now getting a little bit closer to what you're used to for algebra, the application of arithmetic. So it's arithmetic used as an adjective, arithmetic principles to unfamiliar situations, right? And that's what we were talking about in the quote a moment ago. Mathematicians create models of unfamiliar real-world situations. Well, applying arithmetic principles to unfamiliar situations is algebra, creating those models using arithmetic. And that brings us to the answer that's probably the most common, but is also the least accurate. It's kind of accurate, right? Algebra is basically arithmetic with variables, but it's a lot more than that. If all we were doing was this, we wouldn't really need a whole field of algebra. You wouldn't spend years and years of grade school and high school and college studying algebra if it was really only just arithmetic. But we're kind of begging the question. Definitions 3 and 4 are both based on our definition of this word here. So what is arithmetic? Arithmetic, very simply, is performing basic operations on numbers. Okay. Arithmetic as a field of mathematics is performing our basic operations on numbers. So what does that look like? Well, that could look like this. If I perform this operation, I'm going to get that. Okay. 3 and 5 are both numbers. This symbol here is representing an operation. So time for another definition. Our videos won't always be so jammed full of definitions, but getting things started, we really need to know what it is we're talking about. Right? When you talk about the operation of addition or subtraction or whatever it is, it's not just that we need to understand what addition is, but we need to understand this category of what operations are. Right? So an operation is a procedure that produces a new, I'm going to put new in parentheses here, a new output value from one or more input values. Right? So in this example here, I have an operation called addition. I've got two input values, 3 and 5 are being inputted into my operation here, and out pops an 8. I can say the outcome, the output from this operation is 8. I would stick 3 and 5 into my machine, I get back 8. Right? So I've inputted two values and I output one value. I could say 3 plus 5 equals 8. Now it doesn't have to be two values. Most of our operations are binary operations, we call them, because they deal with two inputs. Sometimes you could think about addition as being more than binary. You can add a bunch of numbers all at once, and that's a little bit of a magic trick. It is technically a binary operation. We'll look at how that works with large sets of numbers in a future video. Some operations only deal with one value. Right? If I'm talking about the opposite operation, I can say the opposite of 3 is -3. I stick in this number, I get back this number. We'll talk about negatives in a future video in a couple weeks. I could say the opposite of 0 is 0. I'm sticking in a value. I'm getting an output value. That's not new. It's the same value I started with. Likewise, I could say 1 times 4 equals 4. This isn't a new value. It's one of the values I started with. So that output value isn't always new, but it is kind of in a different place in our representation of what's going on here, right? So 1 and 4 are my input values. My new value over here is 4. My output value is 4. Here are two input values. My output value is 8. Right, now this symbol doesn't mean input and then output, but it is often used in that way. We'll talk about what an equal sign really means later on. Okay, just a couple more definitions and we'll wrap this up. We're talking about 3 and 5 and 1 and 4 and 0 and all these things. These are all numbers. A number is just a particular quantity, or you could say value, or you could say amount. Right? How many hands do I have? I have 2 hands. 1, 2. How many fingers do I have? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Right? Not everyone has 10 fingers. Most of us do. Right? How tall am I? I can measure it with a string and say I'm this long. Or you can kind of see in the camera over here. I'm taller than this amount, but that's as far as the camera is showing us, right? Now I can measure my height in feet or inches or centimeters or meters if I'm willing to have a height less that uses decimals, right? Um, that number is the quantity. What we're often doing when we're talking about numbers is dealing with numerals. And a numeral is a symbolic representation of a number. Right? So when I say 5, I could say 5 this way, or I could say 5 this way, or I could say 5 this way. Most of us are familiar with all three of those representations of this number. Right? Now we're going to stick to the Indo-Arabic numeral system that you've been mostly dealing with since you're a child. But these are three different numerals all representing the same number. Right? So there's numbers. We talked about operations. So if we've got numbers and operations, then we can understand arithmetic as performing the basic operations on numbers.